And welcome to our follow-up video from ICL and Advanced Invasives. This video covers the questions that we couldn't get through in the webinar on the 23rd of April, where Dr. Dan Jones covered the topic of Japanese knotweed. So without further ado, Dan, we will get underway and we'll cover off these questions. Happy?
Yes.
Fantastic. Right. Okay. First question, Ashley Allpress. Hi. Would you recommend using a sticking agent with the glyphosate and or possibly a humic acid to aid the weed killer's effectiveness?
I always recommend the use of an adjuvant sticking agent for glyphosate application. Particularly with knotweed, you've got one chance at getting that right. In terms of the addition of humic acids, I don't have specific expertise in that, but certainly adjuvant sticking agents, products like Speedway, absolutely recommended for glyphosate application.
Brilliant. Scott Corrigan asks, once sprayed, would you recommend a cover crop to compete for the space vacated by the weed?
Great question. We have a PhD student currently researching this at the Tufts Well site. Those data will be available hopefully in the next couple of months. But certainly, from my point of view, I'm the kind of control element. She's been doing the follow-up treatments, trying to restore native biodiversity. But certainly, from my point of view, the most important thing is managing the invasive plant effectively and minimizing secondary invasions. So if you can remove the Japanese knotweed and anything that comes in after that, you will get an increase in native species biodiversity, and that can be improved using a range of different methods that we will be publishing on later this year.
Great. A question from Peter Fitzsimmons. Is there any follow-up at Tufts Wells to assess glyphosate residues in the plots where stem injection was used versus spray?
Great question. So the glyphosate dose with the stem injection was 15 times greater than the other glyphosate-based treatments. So you do query where that glyphosate's gone. Is it just into the plant? Is it into the soil? We've been taking soil cores for the past 10 years approximately at the Swansea sites and also the Tufts Well site. And Sophie, the PhD student working with us and complete weed control based at Swansea University, she's currently in the process of analysing those samples and determining where the glyphosate has gone.
Great. James Grundy asks, does burying and encapsulation achieve a better chance of eradication to herbicide treatment, specifically in the case of new build housing developments where it is proposed for burial beneath housing plots?
It's very much horses for courses. So chemical control management of knotweed under most circumstances is absolutely fine. And depending on where the knotweed's found on a development site, in certain cases, chemical management will be absolutely suitable. There's circumstances where Japanese knotweed has been in the footprint of a build, for example, and that knotweed is going to have to be moved. Now, it can be moved on site, so it can be dug out of its present location, moved to another area, and then a lined area, and that can be treated with herbicide and possibly landscaped over later. It can also be excavated and moved within the site and encapsulated. It can be encapsulated in situ as well. All of those processes, though, are remediation. They're not eradication. And I think that's an important distinction to make. If you bury that knotweed, it's likely to still be alive for, potentially decades after the time of burial. The only possible real situation where you've got eradication, where you've dug all of the knotweed out, so there's no longer any knotweed present at that site, is excavation followed by off-site disposal.
Okay. David Hackett, what are the legal requirements for removal by mechanical means and the disposal of the material, growing medium and rhizomes?
You have got to excavate in accordance with site health and safety protocols. Digging big holes is inherently risky. Aside from that, all of the material that you take out, certainly containing Japanese knotweed, needs to be removed off site in a legal fashion. It's controlled waste, and it needs to be moved by a licensed waste carrier to a licensed disposal site. So there's well-established legal procedures for the movement of Japanese knotweed from one point to disposal.
Okay. Is there unquestionable real proof of non-rhizome vegetative plant propagation? And this was asked by Ray Hancock.
Yes, there is. I'm certainly aware of publications. I think it's Bimover, and my pronunciation of these names is lacking, but certainly research in the Czech Republic that's found this, and I'm pretty sure that Lois Child's PhD thesis in 1999 is another example of how knotweed stem and leaf tissue can be propagated, but that was under lab conditions.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Celia Higgs asks, can you use a blanket cover to kill the stems and then treat the roots later?
This is the problem with knotweed management. So in order to treat the rhizomes, you've got to treat the above ground parts of the plant. If there's no above ground parts of the plant, you can't get herbicide down into the root system. Additionally, covering is by far the worst of the treatments that we tested. Knotweed simply grows around the cover, and it doesn't achieve good control results. That's in our 2018 paper. It doesn't work. In fact, it has so little effect on above ground growth. There is no control effect relative to an untreated stand.
Okay, thank you very much. Question from Phil Hills. What months do you consider to be mid and late season?
In Cardiff, sort of June onwards, and then late season's a bit harder to define because dependent on weather patterns. I've sprayed herbicide, glyphosate-based herbicide on knotweed as late as early November at times. Other seasons, I think last year was a good example of it, you know, early October. But that's absolutely dependent on site conditions and weather patterns. I would note that you're going to have delayed maturity, so possibly a bit later than June in upland areas of the UK, and you're going to have a shortened spray window because you're going to get the leaves falling earlier in the growing season than you would at lower altitudes.
Okay. Tony Leach asks, your work didn't include biological control. Who and where is this work being carried out? CABI,
so CABI, is undertaking the biological control project. There's a lot of information available on their website covering that. There's a range of different sites that have been identified and the psyllid trial conducted. There's a couple in South Wales and there's certainly some in England as well. But I would certainly recommend taking a look at the website for a bit more detail on that.
Okay, great, thank you. Daniel Lewis asks, what do you recommend in terms of PPE and cleaning machinery and tools, etc.?
Good site hygiene is fundamental to managing Japanese knotweed. Certainly if you're undertaking excavations on site, have good waste management procedures in place. I've been out on site a number of times where knotweed's been excavated and then subsequently spread throughout the development site. In terms of cleaning down equipment, machinery, GB Non-Native Species Secretariat has got some really good resources on site biosecurity and hygiene. In terms of PPE, I would always follow the City and Guilds course where you're training the use of suits and all of the other gear. But what I've always found is that I feel a lot more comfortable spraying in amongst full growth Japanese knotweed with a full face respirator. There's a number of different products that you can find for that, but it just means that you've got a bit of security, you know, and there are occasions when you've got drift within the canopy, and it just makes you feel more comfortable and confident when you're undertaking those treatments.
Brilliant, very informative. Thank you very much. We have found the Japanese knotweed grows strong through the North Atlantic drift from the Channel Islands up to Stranraer. Do you know if this is the case? And this is from Lynn Mingold.
There's two reasons for that. So there's a strong industrial legacy in the west of the UK. Knotweed was introduced around the time that infrastructure was being developed in these areas, and it was spread around western areas of the UK, but it found in the western parts of the UK, it found a really good home in the sense that the climate and weather conditions were really suited to its growth. So the west of the UK, due to the drift, has got warmer, wetter winters than the east of the UK. So as a result of the infrastructure, Victorian infrastructure development, the knotweed was moved around, and then it spread subsequently in conditions that were very favourable to its growth in western areas of the UK.
Okay. Andy Owen asks, have you any comment to make on potential for biological control? Is there anything on the horizon?
The biocontrol of rhizome-forming species is difficult. Even if you're depleting all of the above ground biomass, there's still this very, very long-term energy store below ground. Ultimately, just taking the example of covering, those covering treatments that we tested, released the data for in 2018, the covering was in place for 3 years. I think we've got data up to 7 years, and that's been, the rhizomes had light excluded for 7 years, and it's still alive below ground. So ultimately, if you're going to look for a successful biocontrol agent of Japanese knotweed, it really does need to be focused on that below ground growth, not the above ground tissues, to affect the kind of meaningful control that we need in the landscape. So that, you know, I'm not an expert in biocontrol, but that would certainly be my thoughts, considerations on that matter.
Okay. Jeff Scott asks, how far apart were the foliar applications? I think this is in terms of timing.
In terms of timing, you've got to get 2 applications within the growing season. So I was undertaking the treatments based on our understanding. They were experimental treatments, so we had them timed, and that was an important component of the experimental method that we were following. In terms of the practical application of that, in Cardiff, with the conditions that we have here, the first application should be undertaken no earlier than June. Then your second application can follow any time between June and the end of the growing season, which will be variable depending on where you are. The important part about this isn't so much when you undertake it, certainly no earlier than June, but if you get 2 applications in, you get better coverage of the above ground growth, which results in better control results. So thinking back to the presentation, 2 foliar applications at half rate, half the label rate of glyphosate, worked as well as a single really glyphosate intensive treatment through stem injection. So it's all about getting adequate herbicide onto each of the stems, and you're more likely to achieve that with 2 applications than you are with 1.
Brilliant. Andrew Spencer asks, you mentioned biannual foliar sprays work. When should the first application be undertaken?
No earlier than June. So no earlier than June, but you can, if you want it, so just to, I think this addresses both of these questions as well. If you want to undertake 2 foliar applications, you could do them in July and August. You could do them in July and September, and depending on conditions, you could extend that beyond. But the important thing is getting those 2 applications on. It's less as long as you don't apply too early. It's just about ensuring that you can get that second follow-up spray within the growing season.
Okay, and finally, a question from John Reed. We currently treat council resident properties that have knotweed in their rear gardens, and we have had a few residents ask for a certificate for the treatment. Is this something we need, and if so, how do we go about getting it?
It's definitely something that people need to remortgage and mortgage properties. I think the best person to speak to on this would be Mr. Gethin Bowes, who is the Invasive Plant Species Officer for Philly County Borough Council. And he's been undertaking these kind of works for local residents for some time, and he would be much better placed to answer this particular question.
Okay, Dan, thank you once again. Thank you for your knowledge and expertise. We really appreciate it. I hope everyone that submitted questions have got the answers they were looking for. And keep an eye out for the next series of webinars that are coming out. We'll send out invites shortly, and we'd like to see you all in attendance. Dan, everyone that attended, thank you once again. We'll see you again soon.